Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Cade Bonsall. Once again, I'm joined by my friend Andrew Duvall, and this is going to be our review for A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. So, Andrew, I gotta tell you, I think this might be one of my favorite horror films of all time because I gotta tell you, it is such a classic. And what are your thoughts on this movie before we really dive into it?
This is definitely one of my all-time favorites as well. I would say probably top 10. I wouldn't necessarily say top five, but easily top 10. And this is definitely one of the most creative and imaginative horror movies of all time
Oh, absolutely.
because it's a slasher, but it's a slasher with some thought put into it.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. And we'll get into that in a minute. But first off, one of the reasons why this film is so great is because, in my opinion, because it's a Wes Craven movie. And Wes Craven to me is one of the better horror film directors. And I think most of the films he has made have been really, really great. Aside from this, there's also The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left and the Scream franchise. He's just a very good horror director. And it is sad that he passed away a couple of years ago, but you know what? His memory still lives on and his legacy as well. And yeah, he's just definitely one of the best horror directors in my opinion. What do you think?
And I completely agree. And he's especially good at, and I mean, this movie shows it, he's especially good at directing and writing teenagers that actually feel like real human beings. I mean, we saw this in this movie. We saw this throughout the rest of the Nightmare franchise, though he was not involved in a lot of the sequels. In fact, I correct me if I'm wrong, was the only one he was involved with Wes Craven's New Nightmare,
He made Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but he was also involved as a writer on Dream Warriors.
which is also considered one of the better ones. So,
Absolutely.
but we saw that with that. We saw that with the Scream movies. He's kind of like the John Hughes of horror, if that makes any sense.
That could be one way of looking at it. Yeah, I get it. But yeah, he's definitely one of the main reasons that this film is so great. Aside from that, this is probably honestly the best thing about the movie, and I gotta tell you, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. That is such a phenomenal performance, and he is definitely one of the biggest horror icons to ever live. And yeah, what are your thoughts on Freddy Krueger? Are you a big fan of the character?
I am, and Robert Englund is the only person who could play this role. But the fact that, and in this movie in particular, he's still. This was when he was back when he was Freddy was still scary, as
Right.
opposed to over the top Looney Tune became in say Dream Master onwards.
Yeah, I get what you mean because I think as the movies progressed, they definitely made it more comedic than scary. And I think, Wes Craven's New Nightmare really redeemed that in a lot of ways. But yeah, with this movie, Freddy definitely felt scary. And I think aside from, just how scary he is, I actually do like his backstory as well. And I just think that he's a slasher that has personality. He's not just a mindless killing machine. And I did really like that. And he's also not silent either, which was cool. But yeah, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is just fantastic. It's awesome. And aside from that, aside from how great Freddy Krueger is as a character, one character in this film that I think also really stands out is the character of Nancy Thompson.
Absolutely, I would consider Nancy's up there in my opinion with like Laurie Strode and Sidney Prescott for horror movie protagonists, especially final girls in that category.
Oh, absolutely.
Because and Heather Langenkamp does a great job playing her.
Yes, she does.
And the thing with Nancy is she's not terribly over the top. She's a normal teenage girl, but she's smart. She goes about her house prepping traps to try to pull Freddy out. You know, she also realizes she gets herself out of the dream boiler room by burning herself. And she's also smart enough to realize when the adults around her are all gaslighting her.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually another thing that I think is really unique about this movie. So I think that this film has what you could call like a protagonist misdirect because at the beginning of the movie, we think, well, maybe you might not feel this way, but I thought the movie was actually going to follow her friend Tina. But then, spoilers for anybody listening, Tina is killed off not too early on in the movie, and then it follows Nancy. And I thought, wow, I honestly thought the movie was going to follow her, but it's following Nancy. And it's such a great way of, I think, if people have the same feeling, misdirecting the audience with this different protagonist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean that's something that Wes Craven would also do, probably more famously with the first Scream, but I feel like it also works really well here. Yeah, overall, I mean, it works. It's not as egregious or famous as the one in Scream, but I mean, I think it works.
It does work, yeah. Now, another thing that's great about this movie, so I think that the idea of dreams versus reality is a great concept, especially for a horror film, because it can sort of not just trick the characters, but it can also trick the audience into questioning, what's real and what isn't. And that's a great way to keep audiences not only, guessing, but just to keep them invested in the film.
Absolutely. And another aspect of that is because you have the dream versus reality thing. You're not just have to behold to the rules of reality, which is why some of the kills in this movie were as creative and instantly iconic as they were. You had Glenn's blood fountain, you had Tina's being thrown around the room, which is a severely underrated one, in my opinion, because nobody talked about that one nearly as much as they do Glenn's. Now, Glenn's is good, don't get me wrong, but I think Tina's even feels more visceral.
Yeah, I agree. And, that brings me to another thing. So I mentioned this in our review for the first Scream movie. So aside from Nancy, I actually do like all the other characters. I liked Glenn, I liked Rod, I liked Tina. And it was another case where I was watching a horror film where I wasn't waiting around for these characters to die. I did want them to survive because I did like who they were and I liked their personalities and whatnot. But yeah, and seeing them die was, you know, it's like, "Ah, man, I liked him, I liked her, I wish that they had lived," and that doesn't usually happen with me in a lot of, like, slasher films because again, it's like that type of film where you watch it and you try to think, "Okay, yeah, he's probably gonna die, she's probably gonna die, I'm waiting for that to happen," but, it just didn't feel that way when I watched this movie. Did you?
No, it didn't. And I'm just going to reiterate that is one of the problems with slashers as a genre and whole is making you care about the actual people who are going to be killed. And a lot of times slashers do not achieve that, but this movie actually does it quite well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And aside from that, another thing that I love about this movie is I think that it's actually the perfect blend of both slasher and supernatural horror.
Yeah, because yeah, there's a lot of slash kills going on, but there's also that supernatural aspect of you have to be asleep for Freddy to kill you, which is a completely supernatural thing. And actually, another thing, like I was mentioning, it's not just the kills that benefit from the fact that they don't have to behold to the rules of reality in this movie. It's some of the other scares in this movie because this movie is legitimately scary too. Like I know this came out in the '80s, which was like considered a golden age of horror, but this one's like legitimately scary. Like you get, for me, my favorite scene that's not a kill will forever be Freddy coming through the wall and them having the actual like practical effects, like he's
Right.
about to burst out. And other than that, you got like Freddy cutting off his own finger, showing that he can't be hurt, that nothing hurts him, or cutting his own chest open and the goo and the maggots it's fall out. Like this is a legitimately scary movie. And this might be the fact that we're so desensitized nowadays, but that's a legitimately tough thing to pull off.
Yes, it is. And another thing, and this will be my last pro. So the thing is, one of the things that this movie does, I think, a lot better than most other horror films is definitely jump scares, because a lot of times jump scares just feel kind of forced or repetitive or something. But the jump scares in this, I think, are actually really well. And it's a movie that I don't think constantly relies on jump scares, because like you were saying, it's a movie that just remains creepy or unsettling throughout the whole thing. And, a movie doesn't have to rely so heavily on jump scares to be scary. You can still make the atmosphere terrifying and still make it a horror film?
Yeah, and again, I'll still never get over the fact that this movie is still scary, and it came out, like I mentioned a little bit ago, almost 40 years ago. This came out in 1984. This is 2023. We're at the 40-year anniversary next year.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite horror films. Now, despite that, I do have a couple of issues with this movie. And this relates back to one of my pros about the film, and that's the dreams versus reality part.
Yeah,
Just
I think I
because
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes you can tell when it isn't a dream or you can tell when it is. And when that happens, sometimes I question, okay, so how does this work though? So how does she know that? How is she able to do this? And sometimes, it feels like one of those times where a movie raises too many questions and it makes you kind of reconsider logic. I know when you watch a movie, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief, but sometimes you just can't help it, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like that's a legitimate criticism with this one because there is a lot of questions that you still can ask about this first movie. Like, I mean, again, a lot of stuff like why did Nancy's hair turn gray when Freddie attacked her when she was at the sleep clinic? Like, I mean, a lot of that was explained when she pulled Freddie into the real world, but a lot of that stuff also happened when Freddie was still in the dream world. So yeah, I definitely feel where you're coming from with that one.
Yeah, and in terms of just raising questions, here's my biggest one. So my biggest question is, do people really need to be asleep in order for Freddy to kill them? Because I think from what I remember, a couple of them were still awake when he did kill them. I think when he kills Tina when she's flying around the bedroom, it seemed like she was still awake. And also when he gets Rod, he hangs him inside his jail cell, but it seemed like he was awake and he was still able to do that to him when he wasn't asleep. And I don't know. That was just something that I didn't notice when I was younger, but I've kind of just noticed it over the years as I've gotten older, and it's just made me question. So, how is he able to do that? Is that a question you've had?
Actually, no, but now that you pointed out, that is a very good point. Like, perfect example I think of is Glenn's kill. I mean, when grabs him and pulls him into the bed, you can clearly see that his eyes are open. So either he's awake or this is all still in the dream world. But in that case, how the hell does all the blood shoot out and end up on the ceiling, which his parents can clearly see when they come in afterwards? So yeah, that is a good point. I don't know how many other people have had this question though that is a legit question.
Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't ruin the movie. It's still a great movie. It's just something that I've noticed over time. But aside from that, my final like complaint with this movie is probably just Nancy's parents because they're the ones who killed Freddy Krueger alongside a group of other parents, but for some reason they just keep rejecting the idea that Freddy might be back. And I know that they killed him, they want to believe that he's dead, but Nancy, when she wakes up and she brings Freddy's hat into the real world, she has physical proof that, that she has it and that Fred Krueger might be back. And yet they just keep turning it down, they keep rushing it off. And it just keeps making me wonder, do you guys actually do you not care? Do you not just are you seriously gonna do this to Nancy? You know?
Yeah, and throw that fact on top of the fact that the two of them just bicker constantly,
Yes, they do.
and the fact that both of them only have one facial expression the entire movie. Yeah, they're not gonna. I'm not gonna lie, they're pretty freaking annoying.
I mean, the actors are still fine, but yeah, their characters, I just thought, I mean, you're not being very good parents here, or very responsible parents in this situation.
Yeah, especially because not only does Nancy grab the hat, she's also got a slice mark on her arm that wasn't there before, which
Right.
looks suspiciously like the the finger knives.
Yes, absolutely.
So are you just in denial, or are you trying to gaslight your daughter?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, those are my only like big complaints with the film. Other than that, I still love this movie. It's again one of my favorite horror films, and yeah, I think it will remain to be for ever. And it's a classic. But in terms of a rating, what would you give it on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, before we get to ratings, I actually have two additional cons I would like to talk
Oh, sure, go ahead.
about. One's let's not say huge, but let's say it's a pretty big one. The small one is that scene where they're all on the bridge talking to each other, and there's palm trees in the background. This is supposed to take place in Ohio. I don't know if you've been to Ohio. There's not a lot of palm trees there.
Right,
So I feel like that kind of takes out of the immersion for a little bit. It's not a huge complaint, but it's a nitpick I've always had watching this movie.
I get
My
it.
bigger complaint is what is up with that ending? I get the vibe that they made that ending. Now, I have since learned that this was not Wes Craven's idea. In fact, the man himself hated it. Apparently, this was something from their producer, the Rob Shea, that he insisted on being added. But this ending feels like they had no intention of making a sequel, like just this kind of like everybody dies at the end kind of ending. And also that, oh my god, that dummy getting pulled through the front door window. Oh my god, that is top 10 worst practical effects for me of all time. It just looks so bad and awkward.
I get what you mean. I get it.
Yeah, no, that's my only other two nitpicks.
I get it. Yeah, those are very valid criticisms. But yeah, but in terms of a rating, what would you give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
Even with those complaints, this is still a very, very good movie, and it's in the annals of great horror movies for a reason. So I'm gonna give it a 9. I think. I still think, even with its foibles, it's a classic of horror for a reason, and it's got one of the most iconic horror movie villains of all time for a reason. So
I absolutely agree. I also give it a 9. Even with the criticisms that I have, I still rank it very high on my list. And yeah, I think that it's one of the best. And I'm so grateful to Wes Craven that he made this. And it obviously created a huge franchise, which, I think had its ups and downs over the years. But yeah, this will definitely remain, I think, the best Nightmare on Elm Street. If they ever do another remake or a reboot, this will still be the best. But yeah, I love this movie, and I'm glad you do too. And yeah, I guess that's the end of our review. Thanks, guys, for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll see you later.